Lillian, do you know where Andrea's at?
I assume she's coming. Oh, she's in the script, so she must be coming. I see her circle.
Okay. So should I start broadcasting or should we wait for Sarah and Andrea first?
I'm sending a message. Yeah. Yes. She says she's searching for the link. Sorry.
Okay, let me resend it to them really quick again then.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Yep. Okay. It's done. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna start broadcasting now, while hopefully Sarah will get here in the time that we're waiting for everyone to settle in. Alrighty, people, got your game face on. Oh, there's Sarah. Perfect. Hey, Sarah.
Hi.
Alrighty, everyone. So I'm gonna start broadcasting and then we'll wait about 3 minutes and then we'll get started with the intro. When I say your name, please feel free to wave at the camera and then we'll go from there. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just waiting for everyone to settle in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We're going to give it another 2 more minutes just for everyone to come on to this webinar, and then we'll get started. Thank you for your patience. Alrighty, everyone, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Grad Careers Alumni Panel, Inclusive Voices and Diverse Experiences in STEM and Academia, hosted by the Office of Career Services. My name is Vanessa Chu from the Office of Alumni and Parent Relations, and I hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy during this time. Today, we have Daniel Garcia, class of 10, Callie Glanton, class of 20, Sarah Johnson, class of 13, and Christine Lee, class of 11, who will talk to us about their experiences navigating graduate school and beyond. Andrea Zavala, class of 21, OCS Peer Consultant, and Jeanette Martinez, OCS Program and Employer Relations Manager, will be our moderators for today. This will be recorded and shared on HMC's YouTube channel, and we will forward you the link later on in our follow-up email. We will be taking questions at the end of the event, but please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box, and we will try to get through as many as we can. Lillian Nguyen, OCS Associate Director, will be moderating the Q&A after the presentation. We will be typing in questions in the chat while at reference. Without further ado, Jeanette, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are super excited to have all of you joining us and our Harvey Mudd alum. So as we start, we're going to just start with introductions. So if our panelists can please share their names, their majors and grad years at HMC, and also the name of the grad institution that they attended. Daniel, can you start us off?
Definitely, yeah. So thanks for having me. My name is Daniel. I was a bio major at Mudd, graduated in 2010. For grad school, I attended UC San Diego Biomedical Sciences program, and I got my PhD in 2018.
Nice. Could you explain the term postdoc? Some of our audience members may not be so familiar with that.
So my current position right now is a postdoc in industry, actually, and it's a temporary position after your PhD to continue your training as a scientist, and it's typically used in academia as a stepping stone to becoming a professor. But companies are now starting to use this sort of position, and so that's where I'm at right now.
Nice. Thank you so much, Daniel. Callie?
Hi, I'm Callie Glanton. I graduated in 2020. I was a math comp bio major, and due to COVID, I've deferred my start date. So in 2021, I will be going to the University of Michigan through their program in biomedical sciences.
Great, great to hear. Congratulations, recent grad. And then Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Lee. I graduated Mudd in 2011. I was a mathematical biology major, and I went to get my PhD in biomedical engineering at UC Irvine, and I graduated, I defended last year.
Awesome, awesome. And last but not least, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I graduated 2013 from the computer science program, and I just finished one master's at UC Berkeley in biostatistics, and I'm currently in another master's program for a master's of public health in maternal, child, and adolescent health, also at Berkeley.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves, and we'll go ahead and get started with the first question. Could you please give us a brief background of your graduate school journey, starting with what motivated you to apply, your experience during the application process, and where you are now? Sarah, could you start us off?
Sure, I maybe have the least typical of those here. So I graduated in 2013 and then actually worked in industry in San Francisco for a couple of years, working back on infrastructure at a subsidiary of Cisco. So I definitely did not graduate Mudd intending to go to grad school at all. I didn't think I was going to at any point. It wasn't just a not now thing. But for a variety of reasons, which I can go into more detail if we want, I wasn't super happy working in the tech industry. And I was getting more interested in more formally exploring my interest in sexual health and sexual education. And so after about 2 years, a bunch of things kind of happened all at once, and I ended up leaving. And I decided to take that opportunity to actually just go in the direction of sexual health. But I had no idea what to do. I had no idea like what there was. So I took about a year off, and during that time I applied to graduate programs. At the time, like I said, like I had no idea what I was doing. So I just looking into things, learned that biostatistics was a field that existed. And part of the reason that I was interested in that was I wanted to do something in the realm of sexual and reproductive health, but while there are human sexuality PhD programs, they're few and far between. They're not always accredited. It's kind of a weird, stigmatized field. So it's complicated, and definitely wasn't going to get funding as in any of those programs. So I was looking into maybe relying more on the STEM side of things and my background there. And I also did want more of a statistical and research methods like foundation. So I started looking into statistics and how that could be related, and that's how I came across biostats, which is very broadly defined, and it really depends on what school you're talking about, what it means. But at least Berkeley's program, it's pretty broad, and the biostats faculty are pretty chill at Berkeley, and so you can kind of focus on whatever you want. And the nice thing is that I actually was in the PhD track, but unlike most PhD programs where you get a master's while you're doing it, but you really are a PhD student the whole time, for Berkeley Biostats, they do separate it out. So regardless, you are just a master's student. And that was really nice for me personally, because I wasn't super sure I wanted to stay for the whole PhD, and in fact didn't stay for it. So that was nice to have that flexibility. And then yeah, so I finished the biostats PhD. That was, or sorry, not the PhD, the master's. And I wasn't feeling super inspired by any of the research that the professors were doing. And so I kind of decided not to do the PhD, but I had kind of been like in a bunch of the maternal child health classes anyway, and kind of feeling a little bit out of place. So I finally just decided, like, you know what, maybe I should just do the MPH and to get a little bit more structure and a little bit more support in the actual fields that I wanted to be working in. And so that's why I decided to do the MPH program. And so far I've been pretty happy with that decision. But yeah, so that's my path. I can go into more detail if anybody has specific questions, but I'll leave it at that for now.
I have a follow-up. Sorry, Andrea, I have a follow-up. So Sarah, since you were at your full-time position and then you decided like 2 years into it, you're like, I want something else.
Yeah.
Did you have to take like certain exams, or how did you like prepare for that?
Oh yeah, good question. So you do have to take the GRE. That's a pretty common requirement. The nice thing about that though is that the GRE is really not that different from the SAT, at least in my experience. So mostly I just took a couple of months to study for that. And because I was taking time off, that was pretty easy for me to do. So that's going to be a different experience for everyone. So I had that luxury. But I didn't find it a very like difficult test, if that helps.
Thank you for the question, Jeanette. Let's go ahead and move on to Christine.
Yeah, so I would say similarly, actually, right after Mud, I worked for 2 years, not in like tech industry, but I originally thought that I wanted to do med school. So I actually took 2 years to work as a research assistant at the UCI Medical Center. And in that time, I kind of realized that I did not want to go to med school anymore. You know, I didn't really want to take the MCAT. But basically, like in that time, I kind of realized what really like motivated me was more the engineering side and getting to develop medical devices. So again, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I think that's pretty normal. I think that's okay. And at the time, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, who actually also went to Mud, we're in the same class, he decided like he was going to apply for his PhD in physics. So I was like, I guess I'll apply for my PhD in something. And it just biomedical engineering fit kind of what I was already doing. So that's kind of the motivation behind why I applied to graduate school. Then I got in, so I stayed, and we got into the same school. That's why I chose UC at Irvine. In terms of, let's see, application, I think there's a question on that a little bit later, so maybe I'll leave specifics about that a little later. But yeah, I mean, in terms of also just general motivation too, I was really fortunate to actually continue to do research with the person I was doing research with at UCI Medical Center. So that was another motivation to stay at UCI, not just that, like, that's where Sam and I both got in. So let's see, that's one. And then where am I now? I actually started working for the company I work for now, Edwards Life Sciences in Irvine. I actually started working for them 4 years ago. So during my PhD, I also worked full-time. And I'm currently an engineer in the applied machine learning group. I'm working on still medical devices, getting to develop cool like decision support stuff for clinicians to use in real time.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. Can we hear from Callie now?
Yeah, so I originally had just kind of imagined the next step for myself to be grad school. So I always had that in my mind. And so the summer before my senior year, I started gearing up, like talking to professors about things and starting to study for the GRE. And then one of the professors, Prof. Stovall, actually, that was writing me a letter of recommendation, one of the questions that you had to answer, it's not really that he needed to know, but he wanted you to like take a step back and think about why you were applying to grad school. And it totally worked on me, and I like threw me for a loop, and I was like, why am I applying to grad school? Why would I ever want to do this? You know, like, because he was saying that especially for like the biomedical sciences, that if you go and work as a lab technician for, you know, a couple of years, you only will strengthen your application. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm totally going to do that. So I totally stopped studying, like stopped applying to grad schools. And then when school started, I thought about it more and talked to another professor. And so one thing that was really important for me to applying to schools was that I wanted the lab rotations, so I could decide, or basically what happens is that it's usually at least 3 or 4 labs that you are in with different professors in the program, and then you get to see what their lab culture is like, what the actual research is like, things like that. And so that was important for me because that was one thing, is that I was like, you know, maybe I don't know what I want to do just yet, but I thought that it would be important to have that chance to be in a lot of different labs before I had to make a decision. And so then once I found out that there were quite a few programs that I could do that with, then I decided that I did actually want to go to grad school. And then another thing, I know that this isn't as popular with non-biology programs, but a lot of biology programs are not requiring the GRE anymore. And so then luckily I didn't have to, I guess I narrowed down my options to programs that were not requiring it anymore. And so then I didn't have to worry about studying for that and taking that while I was in my senior year. But then it's a pretty hefty application process. And I applied to like 10 schools, so it did get a little hairy. But yeah, and as I mentioned, now I'm taking a gap year, and I am helping out some first graders with distance learning.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. And Daniel, can we hear, just to remind you, you know, your motivation to apply, about the application process and where you are now?
Yeah, so I got a taste of research doing senior thesis research at MUD, but I wanted to explore more before committing to a grad program. But my motivation was that I wanted to contribute to something that benefited human health and human disease. So I wanted to try out biomedical research, there weren't very many opportunities for that while I was at MUD. So I ended up applying to post-bac programs. Those are short-term, like 1 to 2 year research opportunities for recent college grads. And so I ended up working at the NIH in one of these programs in DC. And yeah, so when I was there, I really ended up liking research life and cell biology in particular. So that's when I decided that, yeah, I wanted to go get a PhD with the goal of one day like running my own research lab. But once I was in grad school, I realized that the academia path wasn't for me. So once I finished up there, I applied for positions in industry at pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies. And that's where I am right now. I'm working in drug discovery research at a pharmaceutical company in San Diego as a postdoc. So that's a 2-year contract with potential to get hired on there. And so now that I have my foot in the door in industry, I think it opened up a lot more doors for me. And, you know, being a postdoc, it gives you the flexibility of, you know, switching fields, doing something completely new, and companies are usually open for that. And so I have the ability to do research, but in an industry setting. And so I really like that opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I know that there's more questions and we'll get more in depth, but this next one is for Christine and Daniel, but Callie and Sarah, you are more than welcome to join in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So, what do you know now that you wish you had known then about applying? Christine, could you lead us in?
So the application process is pretty similar to really any kind of, like, you know, if you think back to the college application process, right? You have put together your letters of recommendation, you know, you write your essays, things like that. So I think in terms of, like, you know, especially because I had 2 years between when I applied, and I did ask like a couple of the people I worked with in those 2 years, but they do want to also have letters from people that know you as a student. So I would say I was lucky that I was still in contact with like a couple of the professors I had done research with at MUD. So I would say, like, if that's something that you're considering, like, just keep that in mind. I mean, if I had not done that, then I would wish that I had known that. So any like people that you think might be good letters of recommendation for you, but you might be applying later, just know that you want to keep that connection, because you might ask them for a letter of rec in 2 years and they might not remember exactly what you did, but you can like have that conversation with them. I don't know if this comes up later in one of the questions, but I think it's part of that kind of application process, but you start visiting schools and, you know, getting to know some of the professors and like some of the students working in those groups. And I think one of the things that I wish I had known in that process when I was looking at groups at other schools was kind of that it's really important that you are not only like looking at what research you might be interested in, but really focusing on realizing this is someone that you're going to be working for like 6 years. And if you're not meshing well, or if they're not a good mentor, that's really not going to be a great fit for you. So I would say, like, I wish I had kind of known that more in that process, that it's not just about the research. It's also that it's like your career development. It's your personal development. Yeah.
Christine, to follow up. Christine, to follow up, when you said like keep those connections with the professors, how do you do that? Like once you're, you know, off campus, how do you keep that connection with the professors? Do you send like a weekly email, or how do you stay connected? How would we recommend that to students?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, like, I mean, MUD professors are great in this way, right? They like love to stay connected, and like, you know, even if you send them an email like a year later and just be like, hey, remember me? They like usually do. So I would say, like, so for example, I actually worked with Professor Orwin for like actually all 4 years, and I did my senior thesis with her as well. So just kind of, I remember like after I graduated, she's actually really good at keeping in contact with people too. So she actually emailed out like, you know, hey, like keep me posted on what you're doing. I think like, you know, every time I had kind of a milestone, I did email her, like, you know, let her know what I took for a job, and let her know when I was like moved, I like let her know. So things like that, I think, you know, so if it gets lost in their email, it gets lost in their emails, but I think it's nice to get those kinds of messages anyway.
That's great. Thank you so much. Daniel?
Yeah, to add on to that, the application, you know, when I was applying, I stressed out a lot about my GPA and the GRE you probably shouldn't stress out about that so much. Schools are starting to deprioritize those metrics because the data shows that they don't really predict success in research. So I think my GPA was 3.2. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that really. And the same with publications. Like I worried that, I didn't have any publications on my resume, any papers. And I thought that the admissions committees would be like, you're not a productive scientist. You're not fit for grad school. But I don't think admissions committees, expect you to have publications. Just that you can talk about what you've done really well and communicate your science well. And yeah, I think that's really all that matters. If you do have pubs on your resume, you should be expected to like talk about them and know exactly what's going on in those papers. Definitely expect questions about that. And don't just put, like, if you're like one of the random authors on a paper, don't just put that on and then, not really know what's in that paper. You should know all your pubs, like the back of your hand. But yeah, those smaller things, don't worry about that. Focus on communicating your science well, and then I think you'll be fine.
I just wanted to add on to Daniel's comments. Like it's been a while for me since like my college GPA mattered. So I totally forgot about that, which is true. Like I think I had a 3.14. Like I wrote both digits because that was important to me at the time. But yeah, grad schools, there are obviously some grad schools that really care about that GPA, but at the same time, again, like you'll find somewhere and you'll find a good fit. I wouldn't stress out too much about the GPA for sure.
Same, my graduating GPA was 3.0. That said, there is a difference if you're applying right out of undergrad versus like more as an adult. So there is definitely a balance there of having more experience doing other things. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, so these next two questions are for Callie and Sarah, as I recently completed this process. But of course, Christine and Daniel, you're welcome to chime in anytime. What was the most helpful advice you received during the application process? Callie, could you start us off?
Yeah, I think that one thing that was helpful on at the very beginning, I think, especially too, with just sorting through what schools I actually wanted to apply to, was that a professor told me to go through the faculty members that are part of that program and look at what kind of research they're doing. And so then I made lists for each school that I had looked into and put the faculty members into, like, yes, I would absolutely love to be part of this research, like, oh, I could see myself doing this, or no, I don't really want to do that. And I think it was Christine who mentioned it earlier that the person you're going to be working with is very important. But I think right at the beginning, when you don't have a chance to really like know what the person's like or anything like that, just kind of searching through whether or not there are actually faculty members that are doing research that would interest you is important. And so then even going back, like I would write little like, oh, this is what, a one little word or two that kind of was what the research was about. So then afterwards I could even just like look at the piece of paper and say like, okay, there are a lot of people that have interesting research to me, or other schools where it's like, okay, there are a lot of people in the no range. And then that actually helped out very well for me when I was visiting schools was, or when they had me, flew me out to campus to interview. They usually interview, or at least in my experience, I interviewed with faculty members. And so then I had a list right there of people that I'd be interested in talking with. And so I found that to be helpful.
Great, thank you. And just as a follow-up question, what do you think a candidate needs to self-learn in order to be competitive in the applicant pool?
Is this for me again?
Yes, if you could start.
Okay. Actually, it's okay if Sarah goes and then if I have time to think about it. Sorry.
Yeah, of course, Sarah, if you're good with that, why don't we start with the most helpful advice during the application process?
I would definitely echo what Callie said. If anything, I think you got better advice than I did. The other thing to keep in mind is that it really, like, applying to different kinds of programs is going to be different. So PhD programs, which is, I think, probably what a lot of people are planning to apply to in this pool, are going to be a very different situation than applying to masters, even academic masters, let alone a professional masters like an MPH or med school, right? So I think what was most useful to me was, by the time I was applying to the MPH program, having a better idea of what I actually wanted to do. And I think that is pretty across the board a good idea. But that said, don't feel like you have to have your entire life plan figured out, or you're not like valid enough to apply to grad school. It's okay to just have like an idea of what you think you want to do. And I agree with Callie, definitely look up the faculty in the department, what kind of research they're doing at the very least, so that you can talk about it in your application essay, but ideally so that you have a better idea of what you would actually want to do when you get there. Yeah, I think that's all I have. And then what was the second question?
The other question was, what do you think an applicant should self-learn in order to be competitive?
I don't know. I don't think I have a good answer to this. I think it's also very specific to the program. You know, because if you're applying to like, you know, a bio PhD versus, you know, like macro, I don't know. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a loaded question. Callie, do you have any more thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So one thing is that I'd say that like applying to programs is hard enough on yourself. You know, you're kind of like going through like, oh my gosh, everything that I have done or everything that I haven't done so far. And so I would say that one thing was that I tried to focus on the things that I could still I don't know how to phrase this, like still work on at the time. So like first semester senior year, there's not too terribly much you can do about your GPA at that point, you know, just kind of keep sticking with things. But I think that I tried to have a lot of different eyes on my resume, my CV, and my personal essays that I was writing. So I was in the Office of Career Services a lot, got a lot of help from Lillian on my resume and CV, because actually before I started applying for PhD programs, I didn't even know what CV actually was. And then also just the way that you can, maybe not swing things, but the way that you can describe things. You know, there's, with a lot of extracurriculars at MUD, there are so many valuable things that you learn that you don't really like maybe realize off the bat, like it wasn't part of like the job description, I guess, or like being like a mentor or proctor, things like that. You're kind of like, okay, yeah, I help people in the residence halls, but with that, I talked to like the people in DSA, and they had like great ways to like, oh, you know, helps like resolve conflict and things like, you know, so just like things you're like, okay, yeah, I guess I did learn how to do that, and I do have that skill now. And then personal essays, just I would say that if you have like professors or mentors or anyone that you look up to that knows you well, that would be able to like look over that, or even just friends if they're willing to, just to have other eyes on that. And I personally wrote like one essay and then tweaked it for all in different ways for all of the applications, because unfortunately they don't have the you know, common college app for master's and PhD programs. And so but I did find it a lot easier once I had one thing written, then I could, you know, tweak it for all of the other questions, so it wasn't as daunting to apply to, you know, so many different programs.
Great, thank you. And in our Q&A, we got a follow-up question for you, Callie. Did you contact specific professors before officially applying to the programs?
I personally did not, but I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing to do at all. Like I would actually encourage it, because if there is a faculty member that you're specifically like extra excited about getting to talk with them, and so that they know that you're interested. And in a lot of cases, I think within biology, lab rotations are pretty common, but not in all different types of programs. And so it usually is the case that you will have a faculty member you're already going to be working with when you like go into grad school. And so if you are in that boat, you know, especially if there's someone that you're applying to, getting to have personal contact with them first, I think would be very helpful.
I just wanted to add on to the to having friends look at your application essay. Strong recommend that. I actually wrote my essays in a Google Doc and just like had any friend that would let me give it to them. I had them look over it, and I think that was really helpful to just like do what you can to get used to feedback and like editing. And trying not to take it personally, because like you're just writing your life story and it's a big deal to you, but your friends or anyone you're looking at is just trying to help you, and a small tweak can make a huge difference. So
yeah, this is great. This is extremely helpful information. I know that there's a couple questions coming in through the Q&A in the chat, so if they pertain to what we're asking, then we'll go ahead and follow up with them. If not, we'll probably leave them at the end. But thank you, everybody, so much for sharing. This question is for Daniel and Sarah and Christine. So if, Daniel, you could go first. The question is, what were the biggest changes from life at MUD to life in graduate school life?
For me, it was the academic environment. So UC San Diego, it's a big school. Quarter system, so you know there was it's a much larger student community, and it's easier to be anonymous on campus. But the grad program itself, you know, we formed a small community, so I kind of got a MUD feel from that. But in general, you know, it's a much larger community and bigger campus, so that was an adjustment. Coursework is also a big difference. There's a less emphasis on coursework and more emphasis on research, of course. Many more seminars, reading scientific literature. These are like the bread and butter of grad school that, less focused on coursework, for sure. And the ability, and one more thing, that I was able to spread out the coursework as well throughout the whole time that I was there. So I wasn't taking classes like back to back to back. I was taking like one or two a quarter, and yeah, it was much less intense in that sense in terms of coursework, but heavier more on all the other parts of grad school, lab work, seminars, reading papers.
So Daniel, because of that change from semesters at Harvey Mudd to quarters, how was your first quarter? Like, how did you feel? Were you like, whoa, I need to slow down?
It definitely was faster, but yeah, like I mentioned, the coursework load, it was much less. So I think I took like 2 or 3 classes that first quarter. So it wasn't as jarring.
Thank you, Christine or Sarah.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a little bit adjustment because, you know, I had 2 years where I didn't do any homework or like go to classes. So that was a hard, like getting back into that mindset. But in general, I think, to be honest, at least from my experience, the classes I took in grad school were actually easier than the classes I took at MUD. So in that sense, like MUD like really prepared you, like MUD set the bar for like this intense amount of like coursework and learning, and then you go to grad school and you realize like, oh, like, you know, the coursework's not the hardest part, like Daniel pointed out, and I mean, or even the main part of at least like a PhD program, but really any kind of research program, is it's your research. So in terms of coursework, it wasn't that hard, but the other stuff was a shift in mindset.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. Since I also had gotten used to not being at MUD already, I think that definitely lessened the culture shock. But that said, there still was plenty. It was in a lot of ways, it was nice to be back in a school environment, and so there were some things that were familiar again. But it's very different from MUD. I agree about the coursework. Not even necessarily that it's just not as hard, although that's been true for most of my classes. There have been some exceptions, but frankly, that they're often not as good. That a lot of the teaching, there's way less focus on teaching and teaching well, has been my experience. And from what I've heard, that's pretty common. And that goes as like working as a TA as well, as there might not be a lot of support for doing that, or for doing that well, or a lot of guidance. It very much depends on like the school, the program, the professor, the exact class that you're working on, whether you have any guidance or none at all. And that very much shows when you're a student. So that has honestly been one of the harder things for me to adjust to, is trying to figure out how to learn from in environments where there's not as much focus on making it a good learning experience. And I've had a mix of experiences with that. The other thing is that the honor code at MUD is definitely the exception. I knew that. They tell us that. This is not like new information exactly, but it's way more obvious once you're actually at a place. Like the people like sharing homework and like looking at, there's just not the same thoughtfulness about what it means to be academically honest. And that was a huge adjustment for me to get used to. I think part of it, what I realized eventually, is that having an honor code and actually like upholding that in a very real way like MUD does takes a whole lot of work, and it takes an entire infrastructure of supporting that. So in a lot of places that's just not there. So it's not just that, nobody cares and it's the Wild West and everybody's cheating and it's horrible. It's that there just hasn't been the work done to make clear to everyone what are even the expectations in a lot of cases, and like how to navigate that at all. So it's an adjustment is what I would say. And like even figuring out like how I'm going to conduct myself in some classes has been difficult for me to figure out. Like I had an experience in one of my classes early on where I had to explain to a friend of mine why just copying the homework was actually not a good thing to do. And this is a person who I respect. They're a close friend of mine. I'm still close friends with them. And it took like an hour of me explaining it before they were like, okay. Like, just like, so it's different. And that's also been difficult as like TAing, because suddenly you actually do have to worry about people cheating. And how to get around that, and that always feels very gross and weird to me. And so I often have a lot of conflicts of like trying to do the whole, treat them like adults, act like adults thing, and also listen to the fact that that's not really the situation in a lot of cases. So yeah, those have been some of the biggest differences for me, for sure.
Those were really interesting insights. Thank you all. The next three questions are sort of related, but I'll go ahead and ask them one at a time. There are three. I'll ask them to Christine first, and then to Daniel. And Sarah, you are welcome to chime in for any of them as well. Can you share with us what the hardest part of your experience was while in grad school? This is for Christine.
Yeah, I think we kind of already touched on this. I mean, definitely the mindset shift that, so, coursework is really obvious, right? Like, what you're doing, like you do the homework, you take the test, you get a good grade. That's what the whole point is. But once you're like doing research, and especially once you've like, I would say even like, especially once you've advanced to candidacy, you're just on your own. And you think that when you're going into a lab, like, like you're going to have this like mentor, and some people have that experience. I'm just saying my personal experience. And a lot of the people I knew around me is that, you think that there's this expectation that you're going to kind of be really shown what to do, and like be given like tasks, and like that's kind of like you're going to be taught a lot, and actually it's a lot of grad school is really self-taught. It's a lot of the research is like on you, like you have to figure out how to solve this problem. You have to take the time. If you don't know how to do it, it's not really like bother your PI, like your advisor about it. It's really find the paper that did that, or find another student who could help you. So I think that was definitely the hardest part, was realizing that no one was going to help me but myself. Yeah, that was a lot. It was very like shell shock, I think.
Could you explain for us what the term candidacy means?
Yeah, so typically in a PhD program, there's different words sometimes for different programs, but you'll generally come in as a student, right, in your PhD program. Usually there's some kind of written test, and so that'll, in my program, that means that you qualified once you pass the written exams. And then after that, you do like maybe a year of research in the group that you decide that you kind of want to stay in. You create your committee members, and then you do another kind of an exam. It's in our case, it was writing a master's thesis, and then also doing an oral presentation and defending your project and your proposal and what results you have so far. That's your advancement. And so then once you pass that, you advance to PhD candidacy. So now you can actually call yourself a PhD candidate, not just a student. And then obviously the last step is defending, and that's when you write your thesis and defend and graduate.
Thank you. And I know we sort of touched on this earlier, but the next question is, what is your advice or any tips on how to choose a lab or professor to work for?
Yeah, so I did not rotate. I actually came in knowing who I wanted to work with. I don't really recommend that. I think, it is a good idea to rotate, just to kind of, there's no cost to it, right? You can see what other people are doing. I think it's a good idea. It just happened that my funding was tied to the person that I was coming into the program for, so I was going to stick with him. And the other thing is I was actually co-advised, so I also did not choose my co-advisor. It just happened to be the person who was doing the research that I was interested in. So if I wanted to do that, I had to have these two co-advisors. That was it. And what I mean in terms of my advice for like choosing the labs and the professors is, again, like, obviously, like, the research is important. Like, you don't want to work on something that you're not going to be passionate about. But I've seen this like a lot, actually, is like some students who drop out or leave labs purely because nothing to do with the research. It has everything to do with who was their advisor. And I think it's really important to, I realize some of that might not be identifiable like right off the bat when you just meet someone, but just kind of like be wary of like talk to the other students in the lab. Like, if they have like advice for you, like, say things that might sound like red flags, take those as serious. They're not telling you that because they're just just saying something off the top of their head. They're trying to give you some advice. So really try to make sure that you're going to mesh well with your advisor, and they're going to be someone that you see as someone who's interested in your career, both during and after grad school.
Thank you, Christine. And this is the last of the 3 questions. Did you decide to stay in academia or pursue a job in industry? And how should graduate students prepare for a specific career path while they're in grad school?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people, actually everyone that I know, did not stay in academia. Pretty much everyone I know left for some form of industry job. I think that's pretty common. It's pretty hard to stay in academia. So the reason, for me, I already knew that I wanted to go into industry. Now that I've been in industry for a bit, I'm like, maybe there's some advantages of academia, so that's a consideration again. But for me, it's more just, in industry, you feel like you have some impact, right? Like you get to see a product get made and go out and influence something, versus academia is more about writing papers, writing grants, like getting your research published. And so it doesn't feel as concrete. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons to go into industry, at least for me. And in terms of preparing for a specific career path, what I can say, at least for industry, So I did my PhD in biomedical engineering, but my research was in the computer science department. And one thing I noticed in like the CS department and the stats department is it's really common for students to do internships in the summer. And those were like really key for then getting a job when you graduate, right? You're not guaranteed a job just because you got a PhD. In fact, a lot of times it might be even harder. And so I think doing things like that, like keeping in mind that if you want to get a job in industry after you graduate, making your network, like going and doing an internship is really important, because I've seen students who didn't do any internships during their PhD time and then have a really hard time finding a job after they finish their graduate program.
Great, thank you for sharing. And now Daniel, just for the same 3 questions. The first one is, can you share with us what the hardest part of your experience was in grad school?
Yeah, I think my experience is pretty similar to Christine's. Like I think one of the hardest parts was learning to cope when during those times where nothing's working in the lab. You're trying really hard, but you're not getting any data. You're not moving forward. You're troubleshooting a lot. You feel stuck. And grad school is kind of like a roller coaster. You go through these peaks and dips of experimentation. But learning to cope with, getting out of that valley of despair that inevitably comes around every few months or whatever. I think that was one of the hardest parts for me, stepping away, taking a break from the lab, coming back with a clear mind. And so, and still being a scientist now, I'm still going through that even to this day. So, but I feel like in grad school, it's even more pronounced because you're working on your own project by yourself. And so an expectation that you'll figure your way out of it is definitely present. So yeah, I think that's all I had to say about that.
Thank you. And the next question is, do you have any advice or tips on choosing labs or professors to work for?
Yeah, I think most of them were covered, contacting professors, even before applying, even before getting accepted, just to get on their radar. And when you do talk to profs, ask them about their mentorship philosophy, ask them about their managing style, and see if that, correlates with what you're looking for. Of course, talking to the students in the lab, even students who have left the lab, lab alumni, talking to them, they might give you a more transparent view of that group or lab. Maybe people in the lab currently may be hesitant to give you their perspective. And even talking to neighboring labs, like labs in the same department, you might get a perspective on a lab that you're interested in. They might have some sort of reputation or something like that. Another thing I can say is if they have a lab website, that's a good sign because they want to engage with the public, and that's usually a good sign. Like they'll have pictures of the lab members, and then like they'll list lab alumni, and that's, to me, that's like a professor being diligent in their engagement with the community. So that's usually a good sign, and then where you can get a lot of the information like lab alumni from there too.
Thank you. The last question of the 3, did you decide to stay in academia or pursue a job in industry? And how would you advise graduate students to prepare for a specific career path while in grad school?
Yeah, if you have the opportunity to collaborate with a company while you're working on your project, I think that's one of the most direct ways because then you'll have, direct contacts in that company, and that transition, after grad school will be an easy hire. I know a lot of companies do collaborate with academia. Companies really depend on discoveries in academia to inform their, their goals. So if you have the opportunity to do that, that's awesome. And I've seen that happen to some of my friends in grad school. And in general, you have to make your skills marketable. Like, how will your skills benefit the goals of the company? And you need to make that connection when you're applying to jobs and stuff like that. So, and one thing that hated hearing when I was in undergrad and grad school, but I know it's the truth right now is networking is really the only way to really get yourself noticed. Use LinkedIn, set up informational interviews for people whose jobs that you think are really interesting. Talk to them about their job, how they got into that position. And that's what an informational interview is. And even though you're not like asking them for a job, you're getting to know them and making a contact, and maybe sometime down the line they can connect you with someone, or that's what networking is. And I really didn't like doing it that much in the beginning, but that's really the best way to get noticed and get your resume on the top of the pile when you're applying to jobs. And then
I also just wanted to make a comment about how, I think also when you mentioned like marketable skills, networking kind of helps you with that, because I think if you it's really easy when you're a grad student that you only work on your skills that are related to your project. So you just really start kind of pigeonholing yourself a little bit. And so networking really helps you be like, oh, like I need to actually broaden this research skill so that I can write it on my resume as a more broad skill, rather than being like, I know how to do this really, really specific thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you both. Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to add on to either of the first two questions about the hardest part of your experience, or any advice or tips on choosing labs or professors.
I can answer the first one a little bit. I think the hardest thing kind of in general has been mental health stuff. So like I struggled with my mental health. I had anxiety during MUD, and I experienced very strong burnout. That's actually why I didn't think I was ever going to go to grad school, because I was so burnt out. And I struggled with that. I continued to struggle with that a lot while I was working in industry. And some of it improved, sort of recovering from the intensity of MUD, but some of it definitely worsened, not being happy where I was and not knowing what I wanted to do. That's part of the reason that I left, was my mental health was really suffering. And that can continue to be an issue as I was applying to grad school. I was like pretty depressed and like I was taking off time, not just because I wanted to, but because I kind of needed to. I didn't really have it in me to do much else. Even just getting stuff done for the application process was difficult. And then still continuing during my first degree, I would definitely echo what's been said before about like there's a lot less guidance, there's a lot less somebody like actually watching over you, telling you what you should be doing at every moment, and you kind of have to figure out what you want to do with your life on your own. And so one of the things that's been really helpful for me is just like also, seeking out therapy and like actually using the mental health resources that are available. And the nice thing about being in school is that you do, in most cases, actually have access to that. And so that's been a big part of what's been helpful in grad school for me, is having access to student health resources again, including I was having a lot of executive function issues, and I ended up getting tested and ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD. And so taking advantage of the disabled students program that Berkeley has been a huge, huge help, particularly in figuring out how to adjust to teaching situations that don't work as well for me. Actually having support and somebody to talk to and resources to explore has been hugely helpful for that. So yeah, just kind of a plug for please pay attention to your mental health, especially after MUD. I mean, from what I'm hearing, that's become more of a conversation on campus, I'm very happy to hear that. But continue to do that, and just know that your life is going to be very different after MUD, and it really makes a difference.
I just want to off of that, we keep talking about also talking to who your advisor is going to be, who the professor you work with. This is another reason why it's so important, right? If you end up deciding to go with an advisor who isn't going to be accepting of those, having anxiety, and it's really hard. And I've actually seen that in a few my friends, that if you don't have a professor who understands that, who then supports you and gives you time, or maybe gives you a different project or helps you work through it, it's really hard. And I think that's another reason why, remember, like when you're looking at professors, to really just, this person's going to be a really important person in your life.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I truly appreciate touching on that wellness piece. Are there any other types of tips that you would recommend to students when they feel overwhelmed when applying, or just, getting that no, just how do you go about that? I know that you had mentioned the resources at school, but if you're not in school, like what are your resources? Like going for walks, talking to friends or family. Are there any tips that you would be able to share with our students that are thinking about applying?
Yeah, for mental health specifically, it definitely is difficult depending on your insurance situation. So not everyone has access to like an actual therapist, but there are some sliding scale options. I know BetterHelp.com can be helpful for like one-off crisis situations, but as much as possible, reaching out to people in like your friends and family, and thankfully, like MUD does have a pretty close community. So definitely reach out to people. I know it's hard to admit that you might be experiencing anything that might look like failure, but I promise you it is okay, and also much more common than you think. One of the things that was really interesting to me when I left my job was, and I was just kind of like traveling around visiting friends, was I kept having people reaching out to me that were there were also Med alums currently still working in industry, and they were just like, I want to take you out to lunch, and they would basically ask me about how that whole experience went, because they were definitely also really suffering and also really unhappy, and also trying to like see a path forward, and trying to figure out if leaving was something that they wanted to do. So like being open about your experience, and in my experience, it's actually been really helpful because it helps me see how many other people are also asking a lot of these questions. But yeah, that's all I can think of at the moment. But.
I totally agree with the like being open, because like something similar happened where I felt really like overwhelmed, and you feel like you're failing, essentially you're failing yourself, and like kind of talking about that with my friends, and like them being like, oh, like I thought you had it all together, and it's like, no, I thought you had it all together. And I think it's like, it kind of like, maybe you both aren't doing that great at the moment, but at least you feel like you can talk about it with someone, and like, kind of feel like camaraderie in it, and it definitely uplifts you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I truly appreciate it. So I think we're at our final, oh no, not our final question. Never mind. All right. So this is open to all our panelists. So Callie, Daniel, Sarah, and Christine, please feel free. This question is a two-parter, so I can break it down. Would you be open to share your experience when applying and or completing grad school as a woman or a person of color or a first-gen graduate? What were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome? If anybody wants to take any of those questions.
Okay, I guess I'll just start.
Thank you, Christine.
I think that in graduate school, it can be, there's definitely, it can be really hard as a woman. It's just, I don't want to say it is, it kind of is what it is, but there is, it can be hard just for kind of the same reasons why even, working in industry, you get a lot of the same passive, like aggressive things, like microaggressions, sometimes really outright things. A lot of people not thinking that you're who you say you are. Like a lot of times people wouldn't like notice me as like the person who's presenting on something, that I am the person who's like actually the primary researcher, things like that. And I think that makes it really hard. I don't think I need to really reiterate all the things I think if you're a woman you feel kind of on a day-to-day basis, and that really does get a little bit amplified in graduate school, where there, at least in my program, like there was mostly men. I mean, like especially being in like a CS group, and then also like working in machine learning and deep learning, it's very a lot of male energy that sometimes you feel like you can't really break into. And so on the other hand, I think it makes you identify relationships that will like support you and help you better. Like I think that's kind of what I got out of graduate school, is that it made me realize what relationships I should actually seek, and kind of leave everything else aside as either noise or things that I have to either you know, fix or like get over. So I think, and what I mean, I don't mean like just get over in feelings, I mean like overcome as an obstacle. So I think yeah, it can be hard, but I think just knowing that you can develop relationships that are really more meaningful to you and serve you, keeping that as a focus is really important. I don't know how you guys feel.
Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing.
To add on to that, yeah, I think being like an underrepresented person in STEM could be isolating at times, for sure. As a person of color, yeah, there's not much representation in the student body, graduate student body at least, and the faculty. So, and representation matters, you know, it's pretty important for feeling like you belong. But yeah, it's something that you should take into account when you're looking at grad schools. Do they have the resources for people of color? Do they have, you know, affinity groups and stuff like that? Do they have the resources that you would need to succeed as a underrepresented person in STEM? STEM doesn't get more diverse. I think it gets less diverse as you progress through your career. So it's not going to change anytime soon. But there are a lot of organizations that are trying to change this right now. Fellowships that are geared towards underrepresented groups in STEM are available. And if you can't find your community in graduate school, there are opportunities to find a diverse community outside of graduate school, and there are organizations that are working to do that as well. I can drop some links at the end, some resources for students who are interested in those kinds of organizations. But trying to find your community in grad school can be a challenge. It's definitely emotionally and mentally taxing to do that, especially when you're feeling isolated.
Yeah, definitely echo everything that was just said. I actually had a kind of different experience in industry and then in grad school. One of the reasons I was very unhappy in industry was just like, I felt that there was a general like apathy towards changing a lot of things. I was bringing up a lot of issues. I actually sort of personally had a sexual harassment case I ended up having to open against a coworker, and weirdly that gave me some leverage to make some institutional change, which was a whole complicated, gross situation. But overall I was just really worn out and exhausted by how little people really wanted to change or cared about those issues. And that was among the reasons that I wanted to go back to school. And Berkeley has not been perfect on this by any means, but one of the things that has been really helpful for me is that, like, I think something about it just being a place where people are learning literally, and switching fields to public health, which is, at least on its surface, supposed to be about helping people, whether or not that actually pans out in reality in some situations, were really, really helpful for me to feel like bringing things up was actually something that people wanted to listen to and cared about. There have been plenty of things to bring up, but I've felt more supported in doing so. And that has been a huge difference for me. And I would guess it would be a lot of cases. That said, you know, different companies are going to be different industries are going to be different schools are going to be different. But yeah, so, and to be fair, I was also at a more outspoken part of my life by then. And the world changed a little bit. But yeah, I think for me, just there being some sort of indication, kind of like Daniel's pointing out, that there at least are some people who care and are wanting to make institutional change and like want to support you in pointing things out and trying to make change.
Thank you all so much. I believe that this is valuable information, and I'm taking notes so that we can, you know, share them as quotes later on. But thank you so much.
Okay, so these last two questions are for all four panelists. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And what are your final words of advice if you could give it to current students at Harvey-Mudd? Let's start with you, Callie.
Yeah, so I haven't done that much in my graduate school career just yet. But I would say if there are people that are tuning in that are not in their senior year yet, I found it a little bit difficult to apply while I was taking classes at the same time. And so I wish I had taken that time during the summer to at least get like one thing, you know, out of the way before classes started, so I didn't have to worry about the entire application process. But that being said, I kind of thought about this with a different question earlier, was that I think that a lot of people at Mudd feel guilty about doing other things that aren't schoolwork because there's so much schoolwork at Mudd. And so I'd find myself sometimes where I'd sit down and say like, okay, I have to do this part of this application. And then the entire time I'm like feeling good, like, oh, I should be working on my homework. Like that's due. This application isn't due for like a month, blah, blah, blah. And so I would just say that making sure you like carve out the time to work on these things. Cause like, you know, it's part of investing in your future and, you know, like what your next step is going to be after Mudd. And so yeah, just taking the time to do that. And then also given the current COVID situation that we're in, part of me wishes that I would have applied to a master's program because one thing was that I would not have that big of a problem with online classes, but the reason that I decided overall to defer a year was because that I felt like I wasn't going to have a lot of the opportunities within the labs and within rotations during my first year that I was really looking forward to. And so obviously we don't know what the situation is going to be like in a year, but I do think that a master's program or something where it is more class focused your first year could be a little more adjustable, but at the same time, you know, there's already going to be at least like one cohort of people that have gone through having like distanced lab meetings or things like that. And so, you know, it might end up being more close to what a normal situation would look like than you may think.
Thank you, Callie. And Daniel, could you answer those two?
Yeah, if I had to do it all over again, for anyone out there who's interested in doing like a biological or biomedical sciences PhD, I think I would probably go back and choose a project that's focuses more on skills around next generation sequencing. That's like a huge technology boom that's happening right now in biotech and pharma, and companies are always constantly looking for people with the skills to analyze and manipulate the data from next generation sequencing, genome sequencing, DNA, RNA sequencing, all those different variations. And so that would require like bioinformatics skills, coding. I probably, looking back, should have picked a project where I could develop those skills. I basically stayed in the wet lab the whole time, and now, you know, looking into the job market, there's a lot of jobs that require those skills, and I don't really have them right now. So yeah, I would probably go back and look into that instead. Words of advice, I would say don't confine yourself to the lab bench. You know, develop skills outside the lab. You know, practice writing. Science communication is really important. You know, do like science outreach, volunteering, these sorts of things. Keep mentoring the next generation, These are, skills that I wish I probably would have started doing sooner. I started doing, getting into them towards the end of grad school, but I really should have started it like on day one. Engaging your community in science outreach, I think, is really important. Kind of like a duty that you have as a scientist, and especially right now, where science is on the hot seat in many cases. So that's kind of where I would tell you to go.
Thank you. And can we hear from Christine?
Yes, I mean, I feel like, pretty happy with where I am in my career and where it's going. I mean, I think one thing, it's pretty unique situation, but I did work full-time during my PhD. I mean, I finished in kind of the normal amount of time, like 6 years. I think that's pretty normal. But I only wish that I hadn't worked at the same time, even though it served me, because I do work for that company now. I got a job right after. I mean, I continued, but it kind of didn't let me focus so much on myself as I could have. I'm glad that I didn't just give up on my PhD, because then I would have regretted it for sure. And having that for myself has been really important, rather than just giving my entire career over to just one company at the time. It was a decision that I don't regret at all. And but I think the great thing about like grad school is it's like a time that you get to really focus on yourself, and everything that you do is only to like promote your own career. Like it's different once you're out of grad school, right? Like where once you're working in industry already, like you have your responsibilities are like getting deadlines in and like working on the product. I mean, in grad school, you get to really just do really whatever you want to do. I mean, to be honest, obviously you have to work on your thesis, but like if you wanted to, like, I mean, Daniel kind of pointed out, if like you're doing mostly wet lab experiments and you wanted to learn how to code, like you have the time to do that, and you can do that, and you can take classes in grad school to do that, and you can, I feel like that's kind of one thing that I wish I had done more of in grad school, is like taking advantage of like working on myself, like doing all those things just for myself. I mean, even like, and Callie kind of mentioned like doing things that are fun, like wish I'd done more of that in grad school too. Like, you basically have like, whenever you want to take vacation, you can take vacation in grad school pretty much. Like, I mean, obviously like that's not necessarily always true, but like it's totally different once you're not in school anymore. And like, I wish I had taken more advantage of those kinds of things, for sure. And in terms of, final words of advice, I mean, that's pretty much, like if you, I guess, I mean, even if you're not applying to grad school, I would say that, I mean, I think it's like such an exciting time to kind of, I mean, I know it's like scary because you might not know exactly what you want to do when you graduate, but honestly, like I didn't either. I mean, I was so worried about like what I was going to do when I was graduating. I remember like all my friends were getting jobs and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do basically for 2 years, even after I like thought I wanted to do med school. Like I just mean like kind of realize like, I mean, I know that mudders are really hard on themselves and are high achievers, so it doesn't really matter what I say, but kind of give yourself a break and realize like, 10 years from after you graduate, you're going to feel like a totally different person and be happy with the choices you made along the way anyway. So, yeah.
Thank you. And now Sarah.
Strong agree with everything that Christine just said. I also don't think I would really do anything differently. I did a lot of bumbling along and figuring things out as I went, but I don't really regret that. And I guess maybe I would, because one of the things that was difficult is since a lot of mudders don't really do public health or like social work or any of those fields, so I really didn't have a model of seeing that as a possibility. And so I think maybe one thing I would try to do differently is take options that I didn't already see in front of me very seriously and actually look into things a little bit more. But mostly I'll just say right now, public health is great. Join us. But yeah, and then I definitely agree with what's already been said for advice is just, you're not going to have it all figured out right now, and that's okay. And you know what, you might make multiple different career changes. I've already made 2. So, so I'll definitely echo the don't be too hard on yourself. And yeah, I'll echo what we was sort of discussed earlier of just like, do try and be open with your support system and try and reach out to people as much as possible, especially like other mothers, like we just want to help.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing your experiences with us and our audience. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A portion, and Lillian will take it from here.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Jeanette, for moderating. So I'll leave you for a little bit. Thank you again to our 4 panelists, Callie, Daniel, Christine, and Sarah, for sharing your experiences. I think your advices are very valuable, and I definitely think that will reflect and resonate well with our students. So some of the questions were from the Q&A section, and some was pre-submitted to our website. So I will go through and ask them, and if anyone would like to respond, then feel free to respond. So the first one, this was a pre-submitted question, and it's quite a unique situation, so I will paraphrase a little bit. So the person applied to 2 master programs in physics, but one was upgraded to a PhD. So I guess the program upgraded their application to a PhD, and that they required to teach 3 labs. So the question is, could you share any experience being a TA in graduate school, and how did you prepare for that? And I believe so far only Sarah had expressed that she was a TA, right? Could you share?
Yeah. Okay. So TA for lab is going to be a little bit different from what I've done, but the short answer is it's going to be okay. Breathe. So when I first started, I was Berkeley calls it GSIing. So if I throw in those letters, that's what it means. It means TAing. I was set to GSI for the first semester for a class I'd never taken, and at MUD, like you pretty much only group or something if you've taken it before, and so I was like felt very freaked out and didn't know what to do. I had Grudered a bunch and I had done some private tutoring, so I knew that part of it, but I never lectured or done the teaching part of it. So I was really nervous about that. And the short answer is you get used to it pretty quickly. It's not too bad. That said, it does vary quite a bit depending on how much support you have from your professor. So if you have an idea of like who you would be working for, or like if you are aware of Berkeley, for example, has a GSI teaching and resource center or something. So if you're concerned about that, I would reach out to something equivalent to that, or to whoever you think you might be working for, and as much as possible try and get an idea of what you would be expected to do and what kind of support they would give you. The main difference being whether you need to actually develop curriculum or not. I was lucky that the first semester I was teaching, that professor had done that class for like 10 years. And so she just had worksheets that we were supposed to teach, and I didn't have to come up with anything new. But for a couple other classes I've done, I kind of have to decide what we're doing that day. And thankfully it's been at points where I'm more familiar with the material and I can put together my own slides and that sort of thing. So because to summarize, do what you can to figure out ahead of time what is being expected of you and what support you have. But also it's okay if it's not perfect. I again, like motors have very high standards for themselves, and depending on the school that you're teaching at, this might differ a little bit, but for the most part, your students are going to be used to way worse teaching than you're going to be able to do. So they'll probably love you because you actually care.
Thank you, Sarah. And this is the question from the same person who asked, but they asked if they should apply to other PhD programs and then transfer out to a different institution if they end up not liking it. Is it common to transfer PhD? Do they have to start the whole program over again, or or they can just transfer some credits over? What are your thoughts?
I don't know, maybe Daniel, you might have a different opinion, but I would say that's pretty uncommon. Generally, like, you are, yeah, I would say it's pretty uncommon. You would generally finish your PhD at the place you started at. Unless you like realize that this program is totally not for you, then you could always leave. There's no one stopping you for sure. I don't think a lot of times the credits transfer over either. So you would be starting from scratch. I would say that, I think Sarah did a good job of like noting, like, as long as you're prepared and ask the right questions, TAing should not be a reason for you to not take this program. And I think, like, whoever this person is, like, evaluate what the difference is for sure. Like, why are you choosing a master's program versus a PhD program? Because, sometimes there's different reasons, right? And so if you really want to do a PhD program, I would say, like, and this one's saying, like, you maybe like the research and the only thing you're not sure about is the TAing. I mean, ask the right questions about the TAing. But, I mean, the other thing is master's programs are not always funded versus PhD programs are funded. So I don't think that it's something anyone recommends, but if you hate the PhD program, you could always master out. But just know that that is like an option. Yeah, I don't know, Daniel, what you think?
The only time I've seen grad students transfer is when their entire lab moves an institution. And so, but yeah, I agree. It's not very common, but you shouldn't be afraid of TAing. In the grand scheme, it's just TAing 3 times. So there's another program at UCSD. They're required to TA every semester throughout their entire time. So in the grand scheme, yeah, it's not really that much, and it'll give you some pretty good experiences, developing curriculum, especially if you want to go down the academic path. You should consider TAing for sure.
So due to time, I think I'll ask one more question, and this question is from the Q&A. Would you recommend taking time between graduating from MUD before going to graduate school? That seems to be common among our panelists today. And if so, what do you recommend the person doing during that time?
So I did the post-bac program. I know that there's a lot of those out there. But yeah, it gave me a chance to just relax from the intensity of MUD and kind of live like a 9-to-5 type of life at that time, and focusing on research. I was in the lab every day and stuff, but it let me rest a little bit, and I wasn't pulling all-nighters or any of that stuff. Like I kind of got the chance to recharge and reassess my goals and what I wanted to do, and give me time to explore. So I totally recommend taking time off between MUD and grad school, 100%.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I realize like it's different. I mean, for everyone, it's different circumstances. So obviously make whatever decision is best for you. But I think it kind of helps you, if you really want to go into a graduate program, it gives you kind of the time to have some also maturity, so that you know what you want, and then you kind of have the years now that you can stand up for yourself a little bit better and voice it. Because I think a lot of times if you're coming straight from MUD to grad school, I think you're so used to just the coursework and that type of mentality and relationships, so it's a little different. But that being said, again, it just depends on your personality and your circumstances and what you're interested in.
Agreed. Yeah, there are totally people for whom going straight to grad school is the right route, but I would say, honestly, even if you're considering taking a break, that might be a good indication that it's a good idea to do so. I agree. It has definitely been, again, I didn't do this intentionally, but I'm very glad that I worked and like was a regular human person for a little while before I became a student again. Absolutely, you mature a little bit more. Like, you think you're an adult right now, and you are in a lot of ways, but you're also really not in a lot of ways, and you don't know that yet. So learning that and getting used to just who you are and what you want, and like Christine said, advocating for yourself is definitely a skill that builds over time. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. That said, if you don't really know what you want to do, that can be difficult. Not everybody has the means to not work for a year. In fact, very few people do. I only did because I left the tech industry for a little while, but yeah, if you find maybe some way to sustain yourself for a year that you wouldn't hate, and could take some time to breathe and maybe learn to read again. I know I couldn't read for fun during MUD. That took me like a year to learn again. Anyway, but yeah, I recommend it.
Wow. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. Like, amazing panelists. So thank you to all of our panelists for participating in today's event. I thank you all for attending. We will follow up with an email with the YouTube link and contact information of our panelists if you wish to connect with them. I do also want to share that the Office of Career Services will be hosting a Grad Schools and Fellowships virtual fair next Wednesday, September 2nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time. Please be sure to check on Handshake for more information, and we will also distribute this in our follow-up email. If you have any questions for future career-related events, please contact career_services@g.hmc.edu. Thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you once again to all of our panelists and moderators. Please take care. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.